Hey everyone, it's the Telecom Grinder, and I want to talk to you about the biggest and probably the most frustrating thing happening in the telecom industry right now, and that's the retirement of the analog network. What I want to talk to you about is the history of the analog network, the reasons why it's being retired, and some of the different options that are available to replace it. So the analog network is being retired across all service providers. This network has been in use since the 1800s when Alexander Graham Bell first used it to send a telegram. Since then, this network has been used for the telegram, Morse code, phone lines, elevator lines, alarm line, and DSL internet, and probably a few other things as well. But it has been in the ground now for 150 years. That's a crazy long time for a technology to be used. Think about it. In about 2015, AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, all the cellular companies started to retire the 1X network, or the first cellular network. And then only 7 years later, they retired the 3G network. In contrast, for 150 years, your landline services have been using the same infrastructure. That's crazy. Not only is the age of the network the reason why it's being retired, but the copper infrastructure of it is the reason why. That infrastructure is deteriorating in the ground. I like to use the example of the Statue of Liberty as a visual for how that's working. That copper statue came over and it was bronze in color and it was bright and beautiful. And then over time it started to deteriorate and get darker and darker and darker. And then eventually start turning that bluish color. Now, at some point, somebody decided to oxidate the Statue of Liberty and turn that statue into the blue turquoise color we see it as now. And it's beautiful, that's fine, but for your telecom services, that doesn't work because it starts to create service issues. Service issues like static on your phone lines, lines working intermittently or not working at all. I think the most bizarre thing that happens for intermittent service is that if it starts to rain for some people, their service goes out. This is a big issue because this technology is one of the only technologies, if not the only technology, that isn't monitored. So if the service goes out, AT&T, Verizon, Lumen, they're waiting on you to let them know that their product isn't working. That's alright when it comes to your phone service, or at least easy to identify. If it's not working, you can't make or receive phone calls. But what about your emergency services? Your alarms, your elevators? You don't know necessarily if they're working or not unless in an emergency situation, they don't work. Or if a fire marshal comes out or compliance comes out and checks the line, and you find out that you don't have a dial tone. That can be a big issue. A lot of apartment companies have already started to make the switch over from the analog lines to digital services because they've had people get stuck in the elevator and they didn't even know that there was an outage for them. Part 2 of this being an unmanaged service is the cost of labor that goes into troubleshooting the issue. Like I mentioned, it's pretty straightforward for analog lines to know if they're working or not. If you pick up the phone and you're able to make a phone call out or receive a phone call, it's working. But if it's not, it's not. Along the route, there's no way to know where the issue is. Now, on a digital signal, for example, like a fiber optic network, they're able to send a signal down the line and get it back to know where the issue is or if there's an issue. But with a copper network, there's nothing that can do that. So they've got to go out and send out a technician to figure out where that problem is. That is very costly labor intensive. And on average, telecom employees make 45% more than typical workers, so it is a big expense and a big motivator for providers to move away from this network. The last driver is just the cost of raw materials. We just have to go back to 2000 when the cost of copper per pound was 86 cents. Today, a cost of copper per pound is $4.02. That's about 4 times as much. Now I know cost of inflation makes a difference and stuff like that, but still that increase is very expensive. This migration from analog to digital is not going without the notice of the government regulation bodies. No, the FCC is coming out with public notices in conjunction with all of the major providers to let people know that this network is being shut down. I'll make a video about that in the future. So you might be thinking, that's a lot wrong with the analog network and why it's being retired, Grinder. But what are some options to fix it? Really, it comes down to 4 different options for replacement. One is the fiber optic network with an IP flex solution for voice, a hosted VoIP option or a cloud-based phone solution, analog transmit adapters or POTS in a box services, or an analog wholesale option. My lead option that I talk to about with customers is fiber optics with an IP flex solution. This solution is a physical infrastructure change that typically providers are paying to get brought out to facilities. It is a low IT understanding and requires no phone system replacement. Now, the drawback of it is that it can be a more costly solution out there, but when I recommend it to customers, it's typically less expensive than what you're paying for now for phone service. My next option that I go with is a hosted VoIP solution. This is a voice-only solution, but it is very cost-effective. It typically runs in the range of $20 to $40 per seat, depending on which provider you go with and the term length that you go with it. Now, there are a bunch of different options out there for voice or hosted VoIP solutions. Nextiva, RingCentral, Office at Hand, Comcast, Spectrum, a bunch out there. And I'm not going to get into the pros and cons of each of them, but the main thing to make any of those work is that you have to have a good internet connection. What I mean by good is that it has to have enough bandwidth to be able to support all your applications that you're running and your voice traffic. Your voice traffic is not prioritized with hosted VoIP options, meaning it doesn't have a class of service. Compare that to the fiber optic service. That does have a class of service, which means that it guarantees that there's 3, 4, maybe 5 megabytes of internet that is guaranteed to support those lines so that you don't have any service interruptions or lag or anything like that with it. The other thing about hosted VoIP that's a positive is that it gives a voice redundancy option. So you can have your desktop phone in front of you, or if you're on the go, you can download an app on your phone and be able to take calls there. It's a nice way to have a redundancy option with it. It requires a moderate IT understanding, and if you're going from analog to digital, it's going to require new equipment as well. My next option that I recommend is the analog wholesale option. There are some places where fiber is just not an option and your lines are being used for maintenance, so it just requires it to stay on analog right now. This is a good option because providers are charging customers around $300 per line when you're out of term rates on it. And instead of doing the circus of annual renewals of it, you can put it on a wholesale option, get it locked down on a good rate for the next 3 years until the analog network is completely shut down. The final option that I recommend, it's kind of my last case option or my last recommendation, is the POTS in a box or the analog transmit adapter. I just don't think it's fully cooked yet. I've tried to install them and I've just run into issues over and over again, which create bigger headaches for me and bigger headaches for the customer. So I just don't think it's there yet. When it is, it's going to be a very good option. It's very cost effective, has a cellular backup or cellular that you can use as your primary with it, and has a battery backup with it to ensure that your emergency services stay up in case of emergency. The one drawback of it, besides that I don't think it's fully cooked yet, is that it requires a major IT understanding and is a very detailed implementation setting right now. That pretty much wraps up everything that's going on with the analog network and its retirement right now. I hope this was helpful. If you liked what you heard, please hit the like button with it. And if you want to stay up to date with everything going on with the Telecom Grinder, please hit the subscribe button. Until then, keep grinding.